Hi, and welcome back to my channel. You see me in a new spot. I am bringing back vlogs, at least for November and December, with the Goodreads theme. Because I thought, I kind of want to start sharing my thoughts partway through these massive books. There are so many massive books. Okay, so brief overview. I'm starting this vlog on October 30th. I went ahead and the other 3 books that I had on my October TBR, I decided, nope, not gonna read those right now. I'm gonna shift my focus to November, to Goodreads prep, Goodreads Choice Awards prep, I should say. And that's what I'm doing. So I've moved my TBR card out here. I've moved my reading chair out here. There's gonna be a library update soon. But you can see on this TBR card, these are just nonfiction books. They're not Goodreads Choice, but all the others are. We have Hellbent, Atalanta, Divine Rivals, Ninth House. I should probably put those together. But anyway, Discord of Gods, that's not Goodreads, that's just me. She Who Became the Sun, Prayer of the Orange Tree. We've got the Shadow Cabinet and Her Majesty's Royal Coven. Switch the order of those. And then we've got Fragile Threads of Power and a couple others that I can't see at the moment. But this is my TBR cart, and it's out here. And most of them are huge, including the one that I'm reading right now that I'm going to give some thoughts on. So first off, I do have to say, I don't know where I put it. Oh, it's over there. I'm currently reading Caraval. And I hoped to really love this because I really love the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. That's so tricky to say. I really love that. The conclusion of that is coming out, and I thought since it's tangentially related to her Caraval series that I would like it. I am not vibing with it. At first, I liked it. I was getting into it in some of the same ways as Once Upon a Broken Heart, but there's insta-love. Well, I mean, there's a little bit of that in Once Upon a Broken Heart, but it's a trope that's played on, and then the real romance builds longer. This one, the real romance is happening, bam, right away. I could predict it. There's also parts where that I talked about in my last recent reads where I think I fell asleep partway through, but the kind of sleeping where you're sitting up and parts of you are still moving. And so I think I was flipping pages but not really paying attention. I don't know. So I missed some connections early on in the whole mystery of trying to find her sister. So that's the setup of Caraval. There's 2 sisters. One is about to be married to this guy she's never met, arranged marriage. Their father is horrible, absolutely horrible, an abuser. The way that the abuse is talked about, I'm just like, wow, that's deep, that's striking, that's awful. And I think maybe that's an aspect of it that's kind of throwing me off a little bit. But then they go into this, the Caraval sort of thing, and I'm just not getting the whole carnival, the whole magic show. I'm not getting that vibe from it. I'm not understanding what's going on here. It's not bad, but I'm just not resonating with it. But I'm going to try to finish that. I think I've got 100 or so pages to finish with that. That's one of my 23 and 23 books. And that was on my October TBR. So I'm going to finish that. That'll be the last for my October TBR that I finish. I'm reading that physically. The one that I am reading via audiobook, I was actually surprised to find on Scribd and was very thankful to find on Scribd because I'm trying to find audiobooks for these really long books. And that is Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. I have issues with Cassandra Clare and some of the actions that she has done in the past and some of the ways that she writes characters and the angst and etc. But sometimes I just vibe with her characters. I did not like City of Bones. I read that after the Infernal Devices series. Read them completely out of order. I've not really read the modern stuff. Loved Infernal Devices, owned it for a while, unhauled it, for the reasons. I read the first 2 in this series because I think last year the second book was on the list. Last year or the year before. The second book of the series was on the list. It was probably the year before. So I read those 2 for that series, and I knew almost all year that this book was going to be on the Goodreads list. I don't have inside information. I don't know what's actually on the list, but I knew this was, it's Cassandra Clare. It's gonna be on the list. And I've had a while to prepare. I didn't buy it on purpose. I didn't buy that series on purpose. I skipped Swordcatcher and Fairy Loot. Now I'm kind of regretting that because it's gonna be a terrible time to get my hands on that. that being said, I really invested in the characters in the first 2 books. Long and drawn out, deep, complex character interactions. Part of me really wanted to dislike this book. I don't dislike it. I'm really invested in these characters. Now, I will say, there's a lot of ridiculous angstiness in this story. There's been so many times already with the relationship between James and Matthew and Cordelia where they just won't talk to each other. James primarily explaining the thing that caused the big rift between James and Cordelia. He has this opportunity to go tell her, but it's like, oh no, I shouldn't tell her. And it like ruptures things further. I'm like, just talk to each other. The overuse of that trope, not a fan of. But there's some complexity with various things in here and how some of these characters have been tortured and abused in the past and how they deal with it. And the way that she is dealing with Matthew's alcohol addiction is brilliant. I have not seen it portrayed so well in a young adult novel, in a time period piece of I think this is the very early 1900s. I've not seen it portrayed that well. And I really appreciate that. So I'm battling with this inner desire because of how I feel about the author and some actions that she's taken in the past and some other things that she's put into other books. I'm struggling because I'm like, I really wanted to dislike the book, but I don't dislike it. I will say I'm only about 25% of the way through. Probably about, let's see, I'm trying to just skip through because I'm listening to it on audiobook. Probably a little less than 200, but I'm not sure. And this is an 800-page book. I have heard that the plot kind of wraps up around 600 pages and you have 200 more pages. No, it's the character relationships, the things that she's doing well, that wraps up around 600 pages. And then you have 200 pages of rushed plot. And the plot is not the thing driving this book. So we'll see what I feel like about this book when I get to the end of it. But it's not one of those that I hate. Even though I really kind of wish that I did. So that was a long clip to intro this. I don't know if I'll always be here. I probably won't have any B-roll in. I am manifesting cooler weather. I live in the South. Probably not going to get it, but we shall see. This vlog, I don't know how many days it's gonna cover. This is a Monday, but my cousin is getting married on Saturday, so I probably won't include anything from that. So we shall see how this reintroduction of vlogging is going to go. Okay, another update, same sweatshirt, slightly different angle. My camera was here, so I figured I'd update here. Anyway, don't need the cart behind me. As I thought, I did finish Caraval. I'm not gonna be continuing in this series. That's fine for me. I'm hoping for a good finale to the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and I can see things towards the end that hook it into a series. And I think without the epilogue, this could have been a standalone book. Maybe should have been a standalone book. The only thing that I didn't see in here that I know has been talked about before was the involvement of the Fates, like Jax, the character in Once Upon a Broken Heart. My brain just stopped working there for a second. Those weren't mentioned, at least in there. They may have been present, but they weren't mentioned at all. I had a lot of theories on who Legend was, the runner of, the organizer, creator of Caraval. I was wrong. Close, but still wrong. I have the same complaints about this as what I said yesterday. There are bits in the end that intrigued me, but not enough to continue with the series. It did that whole explaining things after the end. It did the fake out death thing multiple times, like more, like at least 3 times. Once is fine. I'm not a stickler for not using the resurrection trope or things being magically fixed, but there was so much magical repair at the end of this book that it stretched the suspension of disbelief too far. And I'm kind of disappointed because of how much I love the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and it's the same author. I don't know if this was her debut or not, If it is, I can see the roots of her style and her storytelling in this that she honed and perfected in later books. I'm glad I tried it. I'm also glad I didn't put it on my series to start. It's definitely not a series that I am continuing with. Speaking of series that I'm starting, I'm not going to talk about this at all because I'm only 9 pages. No, not 9. 18. Not much more. I'm only 18 pages into this. Let's see, how long is it? 626 page book, which is not very far at all. I was a little bit thrown at the beginning because of the prologue that I thought was chapter 1. It's very ethereal. It's very in the style of Lord of the Rings and definitely a lot denser than Caraval. So I finished this and immediately picked up this. Tonally, completely different. And the prologue is very dark. You get background that I think is going to be explained as the story unfolds. I'm not far enough in here to really know what's going on. Like, there's a war with a god and the gods have forsaken this land. I think that's all I remember at the time, but I'm looking forward to getting into this. I'm going to be reading a little bit more later tonight. And then I forgot to grab Chain of Thorns. I am probably also going to finish that tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. I don't know what it is about the book that keeps me hooked. There's something about Cassandra Clare's storytelling that really hooks me in. There's also so many things about it that I dislike. The main thing that I dislike is this one is supposed to be coded as YA. And yet the angst that's there, she goes about as far as you can get with the angst, with the steamy scenes without revealing anything. Like all sorts of all the lead up, all the foreplay, etc. And it's just so cringy. I don't prefer that sort of thing, but also I think it diminishes the relationships, or at least the relationship, the romantic tension that is supposed to be between all of these characters. You don't need paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of the foreplay and then the fade to black in the actual thing happening. By the time you get to the fade to the black, there's nothing for your imagination to come up with because it is very detailed. It's talked about in great detail in the foreplay. My words got a little bit tripped up there. But anyway, that's the main negative for me and what brings it down severely. I have heard that even though there's romance in Swordcatcher, it's by no means as highly prominent as in her, I almost said Swordcatcher series, Shadowhunter series. But there's just something with the way that relationships are portrayed. Friendships, familial, obviously romantic, that the plot serves as twists, as turns, as events for these relationships to navigate. The plot itself is fairly simple. It's not the driving force of this book. The relationships are the driving force of this book. And I think if you took out the foreplay description, which is not angsty, which is not leading up, it doesn't do anything for the relationships. If you took that out, this book I think would be almost perfect. And I can't believe that I said that about a Cassandra Clare book. This book, it just baffles my mind as to how I'm supposed to talk about it. And I'm not going to badger on with it because I need to get to reading, because I just spent an hour or so, probably a little bit less than that, but spent a bunch of time doom scrolling on Instagram and giving my mother whiplash with the screenshots that I was sending her from things from what's happening in Gaza, the horrific tragedy in Gaza, to meme a reel about wanting to set my Christmas tree up right now. Doesn't make sense. Whiplash. Anyway, back to reading. Okay, so I just finished an unboxing and I'm already here in the setup, so I'll do the next update. I did not update yesterday because I didn't read as much as I wanted to. Different scheduling things. Anyway, you don't need to know that. Yesterday, I did indeed finish this behemoth of a book, Chain of Thorns. All of my same thoughts still exist. But then you come to the ending. And with all of the angst and the drama and the trials and the tribulations that go on in this book, it wraps up too nicely. Every single relationship and event is tied up neat and succinctly in a bow. There's really like only one major / minor character death, and it's one of the basically expendable characters. And I just was like, I'm not rooting for lots of characters to die or for things to be unhappy. But if you put this much drama and this much chaos into a book, and to have it wrap up so nice and neat and have epilogues that last forever and ever and ever and tying off every single relationship and they all get what they want and everything is perfect. I have not put this through compile yet. This likely, though, my best guess is going to be a 4-star because I did enjoy my read. There's some really solid things here. I love the bones of the plot and the angst in the relationships, but those other things that I've mentioned definitely let me down. When it comes to the book I'm reading physically, I've gotten only a few more pages into it. I'm about at 128 pages, and I'm going to be setting it aside for now because the audiobook is coming in. The library holds it as less than 2 weeks. So I'm going to wait to pick it up as an audiobook. I think reading it when I do in the evenings, even though I'm trying to stay awake, it's not the fault of the book. I keep falling asleep in that sort of way where I'm mixing things up in the text. And this is a very broad, sprawling epic, and I need more brain power than I have in the evening, which is why I'm going to set it aside and finish it as an audiobook. So as far as the book I'm going to pick up physically, I was going to pick up one of my nonfictions, but I was looking at the section of my TBR cart where I have all the books that I don't have access to physically or don't have on hold somewhere and decided to pick up Thornhenge. I believe I could probably actually get this finished today. I'm actually excited about that prospect. So you'll probably be hearing my thoughts on this book completed tomorrow. Now to the book that I picked up after finishing Chain of Thorns early yesterday morning, and that is Ninth House. This book took me by complete surprise. I knew I liked Leigh Bardugo's writing. I have read the Six of Crows duology as well as the King of Scars duology and the first of the Shadow and Bone. Yes, I read things completely out of order. Anyway, I've read 5 of her other books. She has a really compelling, interesting writing style. There was nothing in this that was something that was going to grab me in and have me pick it up off the shelf. Except for now, reading it on the Goodreads Choice Award. I'm not necessarily a dark academia girly. That's not some of my buzzwords. Urban fantasy does not tend to be my favorite. This, however, the way that the plot is structured with the dual timelines and dual narratives, so each of the narratives is narrated by a different person. They are interacting, of course. It's telling, like, Alex, the main character, is present in both timelines. She's just not the point of view character in one of the timelines. And the way that they're investigating all of these different houses on the campus of Yale. So, okay, let me back up. The setting for this, Alex, or Galaxy Stern, is chosen for this position, this scholarship to attend Yale. She's like the most unlikely of these candidates. And this position is sort of a position that keeps watch on all of the secret societies at Yale. And all of these secret societies are not just secret societies, but they do magic. And this group, the Ninth House, keeps watch and makes sure they don't go too far and harm pretty much the whole world. And so that's the basic setup to what's going on. I'm really intrigued by this story, by what's going on, the mystery that is set up in this book. And it keeps surprising me with how engaged and into the book that I am. This is not something that I would have picked up and thought, this is my kind of book. But I'm really enjoying it. So I'm excited to keep reading this. Okay, once again, another unboxing filmed, another vlog update here. I have a lot to update about because I did not update yesterday, even though I could have, probably should have. I finished a book, the book that I talked about, Thornhenge. I'll share my thoughts on that in a moment. Yesterday, I also finished a book, and I'm going to talk about this. I didn't read an audiobook, but I did on the first half of my run this morning. My cousin's getting married later today, and so we tried to fit the whole long run in. When it's cold and dark and hilly, let's stick with half of a long run there. But anyway, I finished this one. So I've got a lot to talk about. So let's start with Thornhenge. Short and sweet, very encapsulated in a fairy tale. I really enjoyed the take on Sleeping Beauty that T. Kingfisher had with this. It is really funny. I took a picture of it, but I can show in the camera here. T. Kingfisher has written a lot. And I think a lot of it has been self-published because those are the only books that they say that she's written. She's written a lot more than that. But in the author's note, I mentioned that this was the first book that she actually sold to Tor, even though those other three, Nettle and Bone, What Moves the Dead, and A House with Good Bones, have already come out. Now, I prefer her dark fairy tale, more fantasy-leaning books. I'm not necessarily into horror, although she probably could be the one that could sell it for me. But I really liked the unfolding of this story, totaling as a main character. There's not as much to the plot with this one as there is with Nettle and Bone. And so for that reason, it's not going to get quite as high of a rating, but I still really enjoyed it. It was a really comforting hour or so read. Then we come to the book that I read completely yesterday, and that is The Beauty and Breaking by Michelle Harper. This is not one of my attempts to get further on the Goodreads list. This is a nonfiction memoir that was published in 2020. Yes. And Michelle Harper is, I think she still currently works as an ER doctor. Things may have changed. Obviously, this was written and finalized before the pandemic, even though it came out in the pandemic year. But she is an African-American doctor, and in this memoir, it's not comprehensive. It doesn't tell her whole life. It doesn't really tell it chronologically, although slightly chronologically. I don't think she goes out of order with any of her chapters, but I really like how she structures her chapters. She uses a story about a patient, about an incident that happened at the hospital. Although the first chapter is about her growing up years, that is hard-hitting. But she uses the story about the event that happened at the hospital to talk about a wider issue that both affects her life and like reflects on what she has learned. And it's really gorgeous. There's one chapter where she's talking about this guy who had been brought into the hospital by police officers. He'd just been arrested and they wanted her to do an exam on him, and he did not consent. And so she refused to do the exam, as she's legally supposed to. And at the same time, she had a second-year resident who was shadowing her, who was a white woman, very privileged. Harper used this as a way to talk about other lessons, other things she had learned, other things she spoke about the incident, about the effects of white privilege. And she relayed something that happened earlier that day about a promotion for a position where she was the only applicant. She was overqualified, and rather than give it to her, a black female, they left the position open, and so she ended up resigning. And this is just so profoundly written. It's not flowery, but the language is beautiful, and it's poignant and hard-hitting. She uses her words really well. I definitely highly recommend this one. That brings me to Ninth House. I finished that this morning, just finished it. Wow, I am hooked. I think that I thought this went more into horror than it does. Maybe Hellbent does, I don't know. Obviously there's some horrific dark stuff that happens in here, but I really liked the murder mystery aspect of it with the fantasy, with exploring what it meant and trying to figure out the deeper layers of things. And I am really intrigued and very thankful that I do not have to wait 3 years to pick up the sequel. I don't know how long the third book, I think the conclusion, will take in coming out, but I really enjoyed and found myself fascinated by this, and I'm so glad that the Goodreads Choice Awards prompted me to pick up this book, because I don't think I would have otherwise. And then the book that I just barely started after I finished Ninth House, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I had forgotten to put this on my TBR shelf. This is a book that was published early in the year, in January, but it's seeing a resurgence. Plus, I have an arc of the second book in the series, which I think is going to publish in January. I have about a week or so left on the audiobook, and there are 7 people waiting in line, so I figured maybe I should read this book and then return the audiobook so more people can get a chance to read it. I'm already liking the narrator's accent and the little quirks that I've seen about Emily herself, so hopefully this is going to be a good one. Okay, I'm here to wrap up the vlog and talk about all of the books that I read this week. Briefly, obviously, because most of them I've spent an enormous amount of time already talking about. I will be talking about in depth my thoughts on Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies because I read it in its entirety yesterday, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. So I don't remember if I updated yesterday or not. I don't think I did because yesterday my cousin got married, and I know that I filmed something, but I think that was just an unboxing. I might have done a reading update. Who knows? By the time you're seeing this particular clip, you will know. Before I get into this, I do want to wrap this first reading vlog up by saying something that I forgot to at the beginning, and that is, like last year, I am not going to be doing NaNoWriMo, even though I thought about it and thought, oh, well, I'll take next year to prepare. Did I prepare? No. So I'm not doing NaNoWriMo. I'm doing what I did last year, NaNoWriMo, which is to read more. And last year my goal was 15,000 pages. Pretty sure I made that easily. And then I decided to do that again this year, but I wanted to make it more of a challenge, and so I bumped that up to 16,000. Have I met my daily page goal yet? No, I have not. I came very close yesterday, but I didn't make it there, even though I read an entire book and almost the page length of another book in one day. Setting that aside, I do still plan to do this, so I'm going to be reading, hopefully, a lot of books and doing a reading vlog. That style will help me keep up with it, and I think make the recent reads not as, hopefully, boring, but the clips, the check-ins, if I'm able to keep up the pace that I need, I will be checking in, not necessarily in between, like middle points in books, because hopefully I'll be reading them more in one day. And oh, these early morning clips, I always look into the viewfinder and go, oh, bags under my eyes. I'm not tired. I got a full night's sleep, actually. My body didn't wake me up in the middle of the night, thankfully. Let's briefly go over all the books that I read this past week. I don't have one of them. I don't have Thornhenge. I returned that back to the library because that was a 14-day loan. And I just realized there's a couple other books on my shelf that are 14-day loans, and I need to rearrange my TBR cart to prioritize those 14-day loans so I can get them back and not have to pay overdue fees. But I did return that one and pick up a few more books on that list, on Goodreads list, while my brain is everywhere this morning. So I returned to that book. I will talk about the other books that I picked up in the next reading vlog. This next reading vlog, I think, is going to be the last one before the Goodreads nominees are released, because if they stick to the same schedule, they're not going to be released next week, but the Wednesday of the week after, or sometime in there, if they stick to releasing around November 15th. Why they would release on a Wednesday, I don't know. Who knows what day it will actually be that they release. But hopefully I'll be in good stead for that. Backtracking a little bit, making sure I'm not going off on every single tangent, the books that I read this week. This was the chunker that I finished that I'm so glad to have finally finished. I have lots of thoughts about this book. Ended up 4-star, mixed feelings about this book. See earlier clips for more detailed views on that. That was an audiobook. It took me several days to read. The next audiobook that I read was Ninth House. This one took me by surprise. It was my unexpected hit of the week. Not my only hit, but the unexpected one. I read Physically Thornhenge, which is a very short novella, 116 pages. Read that in a day. Another book that I read in a day is this memoir. This, and I think the one that I am halfway through, are the only ones that I don't think are going to be on the Goodreads. Well, I know they're not going to be on the list for the categories that I read because they're both memoirs. This is phenomenal. This is exceptionally well written. I highly recommend this one. I read this one physically. And then the one that I read in its entirety, I'm trying to think if I forgot any other books. I don't think that I did. Oh, that's what it was. I started reading Malice. And so my first few days this week, physical reading, were on Malice. But I have set that aside. I'm going to read that as audiobook when my hold comes in. Now, the audiobook that I finished with is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I love the design on this. I just missed out. I think my Fairy Loot subscription started March of this year, and I think this was the January book. I know that I missed out on the Fairy Loot edition by 2 months. I really enjoyed this. I had forgotten that it was likely to be a candidate, but then I saw on my audiobook list that my hold was going to expire in about 9 days, and there were 7 people waiting for it. So I'm like, okay, I'll read this. I loved it. This is adorable. If this were fantasy romance, I would eat it up. I loved how the characters are portrayed, and the third act conflict was incredibly believable and fit with the plot, which I've heard in other romances, third act conflict is just thrown in there because it's part of the formula. Not this one. This one is amazing. I loved the voices. 2 separate narrators, one for Emily, one for Wendell. His was much smaller, but this was just absolutely adorable. I loved the academic nature of Emily and how just unassuming and very, I don't know what the word I want is. It's not like she was dense or oblivious. It just wasn't what she was focused on. And she had to learn and pick up with different social cues. And I think the way that Heather Fawcett did this was absolutely well done. And I remember now, earlier this year, I read one of Heather Fawcett's middle grade books and really loved that. So I think I'm going to have to put just about everything that Heather Fawcett has read on my TBR. Written on my TBR because I really vibe with her writing style. And I'm excited to get to the arc of the second one. This was definitely a hit and very enjoyable and cozy. And I was able to listen to the whole book yesterday because yesterday had my long run and I listened to this most of the book on my long run. Just so well done. And actually, if I remember, I actually finished Ninth House on the first half of my long run. I had to split my long run in half because of the wedding. But anyway, that leaves me with the last book, and I just have the cover here because the book is elsewhere. And that is While You Were Out by Meg Kissinger. I had an audiobook on hold, but it wasn't coming up, so I figured I would go ahead and read this because I want to balance both getting Goodreads Choice Awards books read so that I can be in better stead for trying to finish that up this year, but also read my nonfiction November stuff and the other things that aren't on the list. And this is a really fascinating look. I'm only about 100 or so pages into this, but the subtitle says An Intimate Family Portrait of Mental Illness in an Era of Silence. And she describes, she's going through the life story that she's gotten with permission of all of the family members that she could actually talk to and to include these different things of the undiagnosed and somewhat diagnosed and not talked about ways that mental illnesses that she may not have names for, but could be things like bipolar or postpartum depression or clinical depression. But I'm only a little ways into it, and I know that there's a lot that she's talking about in here, and she's handling it with grace and care, and also just saying, hey, when you don't talk about these things and you just let it be the status quo, this is what happens. And so I'm really intrigued to see how the rest of it is going to play out. And you'll hear my concluding thoughts in next week's vlog, because I hope to finish this later today. So there you go. Not quite as many books as I thought. I have 4 of them here physically. One of them, obviously, I had to return to the library. But these are some massive books. And for the most part, I hated none of them. I really enjoyed all of them, although I had conflicted feelings about, Chain of Thorns. Hopefully, maybe, my Goodreads project will present some really good books that I might not have picked up otherwise, like Ninth House. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.